This episode is made possible by our Patreon supporters: Claire Shalhope, Matthias Helfen, Kim Hokinson, Bree Smith, Robin Brown, Cornelia Weiss, Janelise Cannon, Heather McKinnon, Jamie Legg, Maria Carla Sanchez, Valerie Jacobson, Amanda Gilmore, Michaela Frew, Jill Harrigan, Chantel Oliver, Lindsay Cummings, and Siobhan Keenan. You can become a patron for as little as $1 a month and help us make more episodes of the podcast. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Olivia.
We are at the bedside of a dying queen. And after a long and successful reign, there is a coup going on.
Oh.
To remove her from power.
Excessive?
Yeah. The leader of this coup is a man that the queen had trusted and relied on and placed in positions of highest power.
Classic.
This is a betrayal of huge proportions. And he is using one of the queen's own greatest strengths, her knowledge of and connection to the natural world and the supernatural world, to try and convince the kingdom that it's not him who wants the queen off the throne. It is the universe itself that wants her out. A huge shooting star, a very, very noticeable meteorite streaking across the sky, gives him the opening he's been hoping for. That shooting star obviously represents the queen's reign, and the heavens themselves are knocking her out of the sky.
Oh.
They are signaling the end of her reign has come. Her star is falling. She's done.
Man, I'd love to think about how many times shooting stars have changed history.
Yeah, how many natural portents have completely shifted the course of history.
Wonderful.
This could have been one of those times. This was very clever.
Could have.
And very devious.
But not successful?
Not successful. Because this man, like so many other men, has underestimated the brains and the strategic brilliance of a powerful woman. Fine, says the queen. If he wants to tell the people that that shooting star is me, I can run with that. And the queen sends out a servant with a massive kite and one very simple instruction. Set the kite on fire and fly it as high as you possibly can over the palace.
Wow.
So now, the people of the kingdom who have been anxiously observing, hoping for any clue as to which side the gods, the spirits, the universe are supporting, are now treated to an unprecedented sight. The star that just fell spectacularly out of the night sky, rising back into the heavens, brighter than it was before, and taking a new place among the constellations shining over the palace walls.
Genius. Genius. Love it.
It's really, this is one of the most brilliant and creative and unique, as far as I know, pieces of political propaganda that I have ever encountered across history.
Clever.
And it did its job brilliantly. The coup against the queen, which had kind of been regarded as pretty much an inevitability, failed dramatically and emphatically.
Wow.
And within 10 days, the usurper was out and the kingdom was back on track. Who is this remarkable queen? She is Queen Seondeok.
Oh.
One of the most revered and beloved monarchs in Korean history.
Yes.
She is very well known in Korea, and to a lesser extent throughout East Asia. She is almost entirely unknown in the Western Hemisphere, except among devotees of historical K-dramas,
For sure.
who will recognize her as the central heroine of one of Korea's most popular soap operas of the mid-2000s.
Yeah. I mean, her era is like prime costume drama Korea.
It begs to be a costume drama.
Yeah.
And also fans of the video game Civilization 6, which recently added her as one of the default ruler options.
Wonderful.
And she also gets, I think, a full 2.5 pages in our book, History of the World in 80 Lost Women.
Well, nobody got more than 2.5 pages.
Yes.
The world history.
Yes. But I have felt for some time she perhaps deserves more than 2.5 pages
Sure does.
of attention. So I am super excited to do a deeper dive into the life of this fascinating and wildly influential woman.
Cool.
I'm Olivia Mickle,
And I'm Katie Nelson.
and this is What's Her Name?
Fascinating women you've never heard of.
To dig into this story, I reached out to the delightful Karen Wang Diggs, who is author of the new book, The Book of Awesome Asian Women.
My name is Karen Wang Diggs, and I am a chef and nutritionist by day and a history hound and writer by night. In particular, I love researching the stories of very obscure women, now with an emphasis on Asian women. So I am really trying to give more of a representation to Asian voices that have been either very, very quiet or intentionally silenced in the past. How did I meet Queen Seondeok? I really wanted to look for female rulers and warriors. And I found it very interesting that she existed in a time during the Three Kingdoms in Korea. And her reign sort of coincides with the Tang Dynasty in China. As it's a very interesting period of time when there was so much flowering of culture, of exchange of cultures. And subsequent to her reign, China started to make inroads into the political and cultural life of Korea. And her story also highlights the fact that pre-Confucianism, before it got infiltrated into Korea, women had a lot more freedom. They could own land. They held powers of decision. And then after that, it sort of all just collapsed to the point where a lot of people think that Korea nowadays is just patriarchy, right? The machismo thing is very like Korean male. But Queen Seondeok I think her story really stands out, particularly in a time in history when people just thought everything is about guys running around with swords. After the Iron Age, everybody's clang and on horseback. And so when a woman comes to power, she's either called a lot of things that I probably don't want to say on this podcast. The way she came to power is slighted. Oh, it's because she was a wife of so-and-so, or this is so-and-so. So a woman of power, of intelligence, can never be really appreciated for the full scope of who she was or is. And all through Asia, that is really what happened, sadly.
This very common narrative that the past is a straight line, and it goes, ye olde times equals oppression of women, and modern times equals liberation of women from the sexism of the past. Trademark.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, nonsense on all fronts. Women have been oppressed and liberated and silenced and powerful and ruled over in various times and various ways throughout history. everywhere on Earth. Women have always been doing stuff.
Uh-huh.
In her case, we have an incredible young woman, an astronomer, an astrologist, a mathematician, a builder, and a clairvoyant, and a shaman, and the ruler of a kingdom, Silla. I start out with, there's very little that we know. The only thing that we know about her childhood is that her father, King Jimpyong, and Queen Seondeok's mother, Maya, they were not able to have a son. So regrettably, he sent her mother away. So in her early childhood, she was probably without her mother. She did have sisters, and she did have probably half-siblings, but no legitimate male heir. And so her father sent Maya away and married a much younger woman, but ironically couldn't get a son either. I was able to find enough scholarly documents to validate that she was indeed a scholar. She was very learned. Women who were contemporary with her were probably well-educated too, because we know in historical context, women could own property. They were considered equal. She was good in mathematics. She was probably very good at analytical thinking. And the thing that really drew me to her, the only remaining tower, astrological tower, that's still standing was built by her. And it's called the Tower of the Moon and Stars, which is so romantic, right? And in Korean, and I apologize to any native Korean speakers who will be listening, I'm going to butcher the Korean names a little bit, but it's the Cheongseongdae Tower, which is not too far from the city of Seoul and is still standing. So it's so remarkable that she built this tower. And I kind of imagine her like gazing at the stars and her saying to herself, I'm going to convince my father that I am the right person to rule the kingdom of Silla. And King Jimpyong initially said, no, we need to give it to a man. Her father was hesitant because she was female, but she convinced him and he's like, okay, go for it. In the kingdom of Silla at that time, the right to rule is in a way similar to what we understand as the bloodline, except that during that time, it was known as the bone line. And she was from the, sometimes it's referred as to the sacred bones or the holy bones. So she had the lineage to rule.
The bone ranks sound like, at first glance, just the same thing as blood lineage. It's much more complicated and actually a lot more nuanced. It's this sort of spreadsheet math problem about your percentage of royalness.
Okay.
And the best successor to the ruler might not be the ruler's child if there's another person with a higher bone rank, which is calculated according to both parents, not just the father.
Oh,
so
interesting.
if both of your parents are royals, you have a higher bone rank than if you are the child of the king, but your mother is merely noble.
Okay. So it kind of reminds me of Americans calculating their Italianness, you know, or their Irishness.
It is. Yes, it is kind
of. If you get it from both sides, you might have more.
I'm 22%. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the highest rank is called the sacred bone or the holy bone.
Wow.
And so there is still a preference for a male heir, but if no sacred bone rank men are available to take the throne, a sacred bone rank woman will be preferable to a merely noble bone rank male.
In that time, a ruler was considered more powerful if she or he had shamanistic qualities. If you could talk to the elements, you had more power. And it's interesting now that in modern day Korea, there's still a phenomenon of female shaman. They're called mudan. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly, but The Mudan is still consulted nowadays in Korea, but they've been kind of relegated to, I don't know, the equivalent of like a fortune teller maybe, or palm reader, that kind of thing. But it's fascinating to think that if we go back like 1,500 years, that shamanism was really revered. So there's still a link, very, very thin, but there's a link. And they do attribute her to having had clairvoyance. And so she actually was really regarded very highly for talking to nature.
This is the thing she is probably the most famous for, was her ability to read and interpret and understand the signs, the natural world, the astronomy, all of the ways that the universe is talking to you, and using that to protect the kingdom. There are a few specific examples that are always cited as the proof of her shamanistic qualities.
Ooh.
And they are all really fascinating to dig into. Now, Katie, I know that you are a huge fan of the history of augury, Roman and Celtic
And Greek, I guess.
augury, and the ancient art of interpreting the interactions between humans and the natural world, and
The way those signs were interpreted in the past.
belief systems.
Yeah.
Like you said, how many falling stars have changed the course of history?
Yeah.
How many rabbits crossing your path have started or prevented wars? So I have a feeling you're going to absolutely love this part of the episode.
Yay! Oh, fun.
First of all, we have the incident of the out-of-season amphibians,
Ooh.
otherwise known as croaking frogs at Jade Gate.
I love it.
Sometimes the archaic language can be a little charming and weird, but I will share with you nonetheless. Croaking frogs at Jade Gate. There were two neighboring kingdoms of Pakche and Goryeo. And these three kingdoms, Silla, Pakche, and Goryeo, were always constantly fighting each other. 5 years into her reign, suddenly in the middle of winter, these frogs landed in a pond called Jade Gate in a temple that's close to the royal palace. And people in the city could all hear these frogs croaking for several days in the middle of winter. And they're like, what's going on? So she used her power of deduction and shamanism, right? She was also a shaman. She read nature. And the legend goes that by the message of these frogs croaking in a pond, she was able to divine the warning of an incoming threat to her kingdom.
So, in European augury, Katie,
Yeah? Okay.
what might a Celtic ruler have made of this state of affairs?
Okay,
A large
yeah.
group of out-of-season frogs. Do you know off the top of your head?
Let me look it up in my little book of scribbles. Frogs and not toads, huh?
It is frogs.
Okay. Okay. Frogs, because they were associated with water, they were connected to the rulers of the earth. So if you have a huge group of frogs in your pond, that signals a drastic transformation in the rulers of the earth.
Interesting. Well, in 7th century Silla, a group of angry frogs, according to Queen Seondeok at least, signifies an army.
Ah. Well, I can see why. Like,
Yeah.
not just...
I mean, it probably very often
It literally means...
is a precursor to
Yeah.
the arrival of a large group of people.
Yeah.
So,
What disturbed the frogs?
what disturbed the frogs is an angle, right?
She was reading the signs and omens. So she says, a group of angry frogs signifies an army. And Jade Gate, the name of the pond in which the frogs were croaking, is a symbol of a woman's chastity. and is represented by the white color.
And everyone knows white means the West,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. So I knew an army is lying in the West, and the only place in the West where a large contingent of men could hide was in the valley called the Cradle of Life. And the Cradle of Life is a woman's chastity. So, duh.
I see the powers of deduction there.
Where do these specific kind of frogs come from?
Yes.
Where would they be hibernating?
Wonderful.
This is our very, very cynical modern take on it.
So she put all of this together, sent 2 of her generals out with their separate armies to the specific area. And sure enough, they caught them. They found these armies lying in ambush from the Pache kingdom. And so through her divination, they were able to actually intervene in this sneak attack. And they were able to quell an army of almost 2,000 men.
And so the kingdom is saved.
Thanks, frogs.
Thanks, frogs. And either some really clever detective work and knowledge of geography and biology and psychology and religion and political theory, or magic.
Yeah. Same thing. Same thing.
Or really effectively placed secret scouts sending her information about what's going on. Also, on a meta level, frogs in Korean folklore are believed to foretell the future. Frogs themselves have supernatural foresight. After all, they can anticipate rain before it happens.
Sure.
So the frogs themselves are a symbol of her own magical predictive powers.
Cool.
This incident was a huge boost to the queen's prestige and respect and her aura of supernatural wisdom.
So when the generals came back and asked her, like, how were you able to detect this? Because, they didn't have any drones. There was no reconnaissance. So she got a lot of amazing admiration from these men who were still not happy that she was a woman. But I think she was able to sort of dance through that very gracefully. And nowadays, we tend to think of like the shamanism or magic, particular kind of magic, as just being like woo-woo. But that was not the case at all. All of this, for lack of a better word, this magic, this surrealism was very real. And I kind of wish that we had some of this today. I mean, even if you think about King Arthur and all of these European history too, there was a lot of magic, folklore woven into these stories. Perhaps our point of view has become so boring, very black and white, that we can't recognize the magic. We're just not seeing it because it's like our eyes are colored now, not rose color. It's
Beige colored glasses.
right? Beige color, I know. Kind of jaundice yellow. It's a different mindset.
Maybe we're just not recognizing the magic.
Totally.
Maybe that's the problem, is we're just refusing to see it.
I think so.
I believe in magic. I am with Hercule Poirot. Superstition is the most powerful force in the world. Magic is real, no matter whether or not it's real.
The other thing that she did was she built a lot of stuff. I mentioned the stargazing tower, still standing, amazing. But she built a lot of beautiful Buddhist temples because by that time, Buddhism was very much part of the state religion. Sadly, a few of the very beautiful, well-known temples were made of wood, so they burned down. And one was considered one of the highest towers in East Asia. It was something like 80 meters. But she also built a incredibly strategic watchtower that stood until the 13th century.
This watchtower that she built stood for 700 years until it was finally destroyed by the Mongols.
Jerks.
Not many people or cultures could withstand the Mongols, but her tower stood until then. So she also had that sort of grand gesture of a ruler who, like, we're going to build and make the kingdom grand by these buildings. She built a lot. But I think her major accomplishment is really the cultural and political advances that she made for her kingdom. She really encompassed all the values that we want to see in a ruler and exemplified it. And she just still, I think, has not gotten the full recognition. She was very compassionate. She actually sent scouts out to her kingdom to look at what was going on with the populace. She supported the farmers. She actually alleviated taxes for the farmers. She was very concerned about the poor, the orphaned, and also widows. And she made sure that they were supported.
So familiar. Female queens. All around the world in all different time periods.
And I think very especially in this specific time and place, I think there's some very fascinating patterns going on here.
And during her reign, the other two kingdoms, Pakche and Goguryeo, the three kingdoms were just playing this political game where they would align themselves with China, fight against the other two kingdoms, and then the other two kingdoms would drop the alliance and fight among themselves. So she asked the emperor of the Tang dynasty, Taizong, to help her. Because of the three kingdoms, Silla was the smallest. She had just been given power to rule. She was a fairly young woman, and Taizong did not want to acknowledge her because she was a woman. He was the emperor of the world. Why would he acknowledge her? But she kept at her political game. She sent couriers there. She kind of wooed him.
This process took a long time and a lot of patience and a lot of very clever strategy and a lot of standing up to patriarchal nonsense. Taizong was very uninterested in allying with a mere woman and was pretty determined that if it was going to happen, he was just going to use it as an opportunity to take over the kingdom of Silla.
Yeah, sure.
The first time he agreed to an alliance, here's what he offered. First, he would attack the kingdom that was currently attacking them to distract them. Wonderful, great. He would also supply Seondeok's army with Tang army uniforms so she could disguise her soldiers as Chinese soldiers, and their enemies would believe the Chinese army is currently in Silla, which is a much more intimidating prospect. But most generously of all, he is going to send a royal mail from his own court to rule Seondeok's kingdom for her.
There you go.
So nice.
Thank goodness.
And, I mean, obviously this is just too much for her silly little feminine brain to try to be doing. And he is generously going to relieve her of that terrible responsibility.
Let me send you a boy. Yeah.
And she's like, no. You're not sending anyone. I'm ruling.
But aside from his open disdain for uppity women, the Tang emperor was not totally a fool. And once it became clear that the kingdom of Goguryeo armies were a threat to China, not just to Silla, he decided that an alliance with that woman was probably better than defeat at the hands of the Goguryeo, and agreed to team up. But not without getting in one last backhanded jab.
He sent her a painting of peonies, plus some seeds to grow the peonies. There are different versions of this, But the version that I like to share is her looking at the painting, and she says, well, these peonies may be beautiful, but they won't have any fragrance. She looked at the painting and she noticed that there were no bees or insects or flowers around the painting, which signified that they had no scent. So it's kind of him saying, you may look nice, but you don't really have what it takes.
This is also probably meant as a jab at her unmarried status, implying that the queen was unmarried and childless, not by her own choice, but because of a lack of interested pollinators.
So she recognized that it was a slight by Taizong. And sure enough, when they planted the bulbs and the flowers came, they were beautiful, but no scent.
This prediction of hers adds yet again to her reputation as clairvoyant, someone able to read signs and read nature and understand things on a level that other people don't. Which she is. She is reading Taizong's petty psychological warfare perfectly well here.
Mm-hmm.
During her 15 or 16-year reign, she did have a male consort, but they never had children. So that was the amazing thing, too. She wasn't forced to bring a guy onto the throne to rule with her. She ruled in her own right, and she had a male consort. Perhaps more than one, we don't know.
This totally unprecedented alliance that she has patiently, slowly forged with the Tang court will not only protect her own kingdom, it will change Asian history forever. Because this alliance is the first critical opening that will lead directly to the eventual unification of these three separate kingdoms and the creation of what we now know as Korea.
Wow.
So remarkable when you consider, again, her reign was short, but she had this foresight. She just knew how to handle political stickiness and how to do the right thing to appease the people and get what she wanted. I really admire her that although her reign was relatively short and she had a lot of opposition, she stood her ground. And I think it really says a lot.
And while we're talking about Taizong, we of course need to talk about another woman who is in the background here by the name of Wu Jiao, Taizong's wife and eventual successor, would of course become the first and only female emperor in Chinese history.
Right?
Hey, somebody should do a podcast episode on her. And Wu Jiao is certainly watching how this queen is conducting herself and building up her kingdom, strengthening her own reputation and prominence. And if you ask me, it seems very clear that Wu Jiao was taking notes, let's say. Wu will take power in China about 13 or 14 years, I think, after Seondeok's death. And the echoes are pretty undeniable between how Seondeok rules and how Wu Jiao rules. Obviously, the care for the poor, the focus on the general masses, religious reform and innovation, governmental reform and innovation, huge building campaigns in both religious and in sort of military, public, scientific spaces. They were both revered and beloved by the masses and really annoyed the nobles.
Mm-hmm.
And then after their death, were either erased or discredited or just ignored, written off as an aberration. And both of them wrap themselves in this kind of mystical aura that allow them to seem supernatural, divinely chosen. You remember Wu Jiao's determination to use animals to prove her powers, including the very unfortunate ending of the training a cat and a parrot to be besties incident. But this idea that they are somehow able to give more than human levels of protection and wisdom to their people. Both of them seem very aware of how important that is going to be in proving that they, mere women, are who the universe wants in charge.
I mean, like in Europe, we call it the divine right of kings, and across the Middle Ages, across the world, that's probably a key claim for any ruler. And I guess it would be even more important for a woman. You know, you gotta extra prove. No, really, the gods did choose me.
Which does give, in medieval Asia, the idea that women are believed to have a much easier access to this realm of the supernatural, of shamanism, of connection with the natural world. And so they're both using that to their advantage. What are the tools available to me? How can I turn my perceived weaknesses as a woman to advantages?
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Olivia, because in my mind, I often thought, wow, they just miss each other by a little bit. What if they had been contemporary? What if instead of Taizhong, it was Wu Shutian? These women could have been absolute enemies, or they might have been fantastic allies. Sadly, she passed away before all of that happened.
And then, of course, we're back to the beginning. Seondeok on her deathbed.
And the flaming kite.
And this shocking betrayal and coup. One of her most trusted advisors and courtiers, Lord Bidam, turns traitor.
There was an internal betrayal that happened at the end of her reign from one of her trusted courtiers that she appointed, General Bidam. He was very double-faced. He even said something terrible like, women cannot rule, and therefore I need to instigate this coup and save the kingdom. So he rounded up a cadre of conspirators and used an astronomical occurrence of a falling star as an omen that the queen would also soon fall. But Queen Seondeok, in a dazzling response, flew a giant flaming kite high into the night sky to show that her star was back.
Perfect.
Isn't that great?
And by a week later, Lord Bidam was in jail. All of his co-conspirators were in jail or on the run. And the kingdom was back on track under the sharp eye of the queen's chosen successor, Princess Jianguo. Because, unfortunately, for all her quick thinking, Seondeok could not outsmart the most powerful force of all, mortality. And she died midway through that 10-day coup. But she died right on schedule, according to the exact date and time that she herself had predicted with startling accuracy many months before.
Wow.
The last, I guess, clairvoyant, magical intuition that she had was actually her own death. She was able to predict the exact day and time of her own death when she was perfectly healthy. During Queen Seondeok's kingdom, Silla noble women were also important members of the court as they were highly educated and valued for their intelligence. So it was really due to the gender equality that Seondeok was able to rule the way she did and be respected for it, and really just like generally accepted by her contemporaries. Like I said, a lot of men still did not like it, but, you know, it was a different mindset than what we have after Confucianism got accepted into Korea. In my intro, I go really in depth into the difference between Confucianism that we like the filial piety, the politeness that we should show each other, which is all good. But then the other part, it was usurped Confucianism as a political tool did terrible things to women. Terrible, terrible things. And my book is dedicated to my aunt, who was the last of her generation to suffer from having bound feet. She died when I was still very, very young, so I regret that I didn't have a conversation with her or to know about her history. No one in our family really knew her history. But I often think about the 1,000 years women had bound feet. What would it have been like were they not bound? Women during the Tang Dynasty, their feet were not bound. And look what a glorious age it was, because women could participate fully.
What if we let women hold power all the time, not just when there's no men left? What a world would that be? Thanks to our guest, Karen Wang Diggs. Find more on our website at What'sHerNamePodcast.com, where we have links to Karen's books, photos, and more. Special thanks to Joanne Kim. Music for this episode provided by Xiangting, Zhu Runfu, and the Korean Performing Arts Institute of Chicago.
You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook, where we post lots of photos each week. Our theme song was composed and performed by Daniel Foster Smith.
Our intern is Katie Boucher. What's Her Name is produced by Olivia Mickle and Katie Nelson, and this episode was edited by Olivia Mickle.